Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and hey, I hope all of you are having a great day. We kick things off here with an entire show dedicated to, I kind of see the writing on the wall. It's turning from just strictly graphics to graphics, and of course, our guest is, a regular here on the show, and kind of taking a turn towards not just video gaming, because graphics and video games, of course, go pretty well hand in hand, but media in general, and then of course the effects that has on, maybe kids, adults, parents, all around the spectrum. How that really plays into it. So, and again, I kind of like that because he has a unique perspective being in the industry as well as, being a parent and being able to see the effects of what he does in his everyday, and how that's, kind of seeing people grow up in this new age. So, like I said, it's going to be a lot of fun where we talk about a bunch of different things, but we will primarily be focusing on, news about graphics. And we have some stories out of NVIDIA, some AMD stuff, just hit the two big players. And then, of course, some more high-tech stuff. So everyone, if you want to check out what we're talking about today, feel free to head on over to computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find everything from the links to the articles, a link to our guest website, contests that we do, articles that we write, reviews that we actually do in-house, and more. And of course, the live video feed as well. So with all that being said, go ahead and check us out. But in the meantime, we're just going to go ahead and get started with our guest. So once again, joining us, he is our video game expert, correspondent, graphics. There we go. Graphics expert and correspondent, Dariush Derakhshani. And you can find out more about him over at kush3d.com. But he's a teacher, he works in the industry, and all around, again, just a very knowledgeable guy. So Dariush, how you doing? Thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to have good to be on.
Yeah, our pleasure once again. So, I hope that you've been well over the past month and you are ready to get into it because, it's, I've been, over the course of the month, we definitely follow up on news. And when it comes to graphics, I guess, not a lot has been really, striking the kind of the mainstream. Here and there you'll get a thing about virtual reality, or here and there you'll get some kind of new monitor technology, but there hasn't really been anything that's, like NVIDIA makes the impossible possible. Like there hasn't been anything really shocking. And right. I guess just real quick, just as a comment, is that a good thing or a bad thing for people such as yourself who have to work with this technology? Is it kind of comforting to know what you're working with as opposed to, oh great, everything we know is going to be, obsolete in 2 years?
Yeah, not knowing is definitely good. Ignorance is bliss. It's nice knowing that what you're working on is going to be, what you'll be working on in a year or two. But a lot of studios, a lot of places will plan on having an upgrade cycle every couple of years, and it's only when things like big advancements in AR or VR happen where it sort of upends the industry. But otherwise, we stick to the same software version for a couple of years before upgrading. Many studios will be at least a year behind the most current version of whatever modeling or animation package that's out there until whatever they're working on is completed with whatever version that they started on. So there's a lot of waiting that happens Like, for example, there's the new iMac Pros
Right.
versus the Mac Pros, which won't even be basically in existence till 2019. That puts a lot of places sort of into a precarious situation where they hit their upgrade cycle this year fiscally, and they have to upgrade their machines. So now they have to hold on for another year on whatever they're working on. So, it's good and it's bad. But I think in this case with the Apple Macs, with the Mac Pros, I should say, it's a little bit of a special case
Right.
scenario, but you can always expect something to change every year, something to upgrade to, something to spend your money on.
Of course, that's and I guess as a designer, that's something that you get to look forward to is new toys. So, all
Yes.
right. So, with that being said, we touched on this last month, I believe, but looks like Nvidia is putting something else out. But it was the idea of and we're not going to assume people clearly remember what we talked about last month, but it had to do with real-time ray tracing. And you have this article here. Again, all articles are found in the show notes today, but from Graphic Speak. And again, like real time ray tracing, we saw the video. It was of kind of stormtroopers in a Star Wars
Mhm.
setting. It looked pretty impressive, and I guess as a technical demo, you said, "Wow, that's one of the best looking digital scenes I've ever seen." But I guess the technology was this idea of ray tracing. So if you could, kind of recap real quick about ray tracing, why it's important, and what this article has to do with NVIDIA.
Well, these are all really good questions. To start with, ray tracing is basically a rendering or a method of rendering. So you take a scene. It's got textures, it's got surfaces like metal and wood and plastic and stuff like that and skin. And you've got lighting in the scene, and rendering pulls that scene together and gives you a visual image or a movie or a VR experience that you move through. So rendering is the physically taking all the math of what people have worked to build into an image that you can see. And ray tracing is a very popular form of rendering that allows you to have a greater degree of fidelity with how light actually works. And just like it says, it traces rays of light between light sources and the objects that they're illuminating or reflecting off of or bouncing off of and on into the camera's lens or its eye. So that ability to trace a path, one single, let's say, point of light or photon of light
Mm-hmm.
from a light source to an object and to the camera is tracing that ray. And the more accurately you can do that, the more you can simulate how light really works in real life. And it's been a holy grail to try to get real time ray tracing because again, ray tracing when done right simulates real world lighting. So if you're in an AR situation or a high fidelity VR situation or even games
Right.
and you want the best look, you want to try to match real world lighting unless your art style is stylized or cartoony, quote unquote, and you're trying to go for a realistic look. Ray tracing is the sort of rendering that you need to bounce light accurately. So the idea is the faster you can get it done to a point of being real time, the better real time renderings in games and VR and AR will work. And part of what this article is, I really, really enjoy Graphic Speak, actually. I want to plug the website. I'm not involved with the website, but John Petty, his research foundation basically runs this website. They are quintessentially graphics experts, and they follow a lot of stuff. So if you're like nerdy into this sort of stuff, Graphic Speak is a good place to go.
Right.
But anyway, this article on this website talks about how it's not just how brawny that your video card needs to be, and it does need to be pretty beefy and brawny. But there's more and more partners coming in and realizing that this is a multi-pronged approach, where, for example, Microsoft can work some very base level access hooks into the OS through DirectX, perhaps, to try to enable ray tracing at a more core, fundamental, fast processing level, as opposed to a calculation that gets put on the back burner until other core elements are first addressed, and that will help speed up things. So this article talks a little bit about NVIDIA's just crazy fast GPUs, but also touches on some of the things that we still need to get through, which is optimized, efficient, competent programming,
Right.
for one, obviously, to take advantage of this stuff, but also very direct access to the CPU at a very base level, or the GPU, and that could be something that we can get through Microsoft Windows or through DirectX hooks and stuff like that. So that's something that NVIDIA and Microsoft worked on, and they're calling it DXR, assuming they added the R for ray tracing.
Right.
And that, as they say, and I quote, introduces a low-level interface directly into NVIDIA's Volta processor, which is the I guess new current generation of NVIDIA GPU.
Right. And so I guess why they weren't doing this approach before was the idea that you just didn't have the hardware needed to do this. Because if you give it lower, I guess higher priority, then it would take away from some of the other system processes that would, kind of do things like, I don't know, keep the operating system running, make sure that your computer doesn't crash, simple things like that. And I guess this is, after year, you hear NVIDIA say, we have managed to squeeze in 13,000 CUDAs. And I don't know what the heck a CUDA is, but, we're hearing that these things are getting crazy capable. So I guess that their approach, as per what you're saying, is we can do all this and we can dedicate more resources to it, because it sounds like the average computer, or at least the ones who are going to be capable of this, we're going to be able to flip on a switch, DXR, that they're out there, and it's okay to let us, kind of get more resources sooner than traditionally what's been kind of stable or safe, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you factor into that the demand from the public, and over the last year or two, you have to be living under a rock not to have heard of AR and or VR, and how much that is in some ways changing and even disrupting a little bit of a media company or a studio company's sort of outlook on what they're supposed to do. There's been a huge amount of movement in design studios in Hollywood, basically in the entertainment, to address, what are we going to do with this new outlet? And I think that, in addition to the cheaper VR prices, with the HTC Vive being basically $100 less this year than before, these things will bring more to the fore what you're going to do. So right now, you still do need some pretty hefty hardware, but it's a lot more accessible than it used to be, and the demand from people, just normal people, out in the public, is growing as well. So I think that's the next evolution, is to have real-time ray tracing, global illumination happening, where, again, we've talked about it a few times and even got into the ethics of it last week, where you're augmenting reality with something that looks real. And obviously that has a lot of different implications, hardware, software, as well as socially.
Mm-hmm.
What we do with that is pretty important. But that's definitely technologically the thing that's being pushed the most. And this article basically is talking about how we're kind of there, and the Volta technology has a lot of power. And you were mentioning CUDA before. If I can just
Sure.
give a quick. So CUDA is NVIDIA's GPU, basically programming language. And the more CUDA cores that a GPU has, the more parallel streams of processing that you have that will run a CUDA program. So if you have some physics simulations or whatever that are compatible or created with CUDA or for CUDA, the more cores you have on your video card means the more hands you have to lift that big heavy thing. Sort of like how the Egyptians built the pyramids minus the enslaving of people.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, the more people you have working for you, the easier it's going to be. And that's what it is. So each CUDA core sort of like is one helping hand in the ability to process all this
Right.
information quickly.
And it's the idea of multiprocessing and being able to do multiple things at once. And I see here, we're checking out the NVIDIA website. They call them tensor cores now for the Volta technology, and I guess it just has to do with the fact that ray tracing. Real-time ray tracing is so hard because,
Yes,
like you said, it's mimicking, like it's that uncanny valley that we mentioned sometimes where if it's not just perfectly right, your brain's going to say something's not right, and it's just going to throw you
absolutely.
for a loop.
Yeah, and um, in real life, when we're looking at stuff, we are seeing, a practically unbelievably huge number of photons. There's so many photons bouncing around in my office right now. That's lighting up everything in my room,
Mm-hmm.
just coming from the one fluorescent ceiling lamp that I've got, filling the whole room with light. And I couldn't even, I'll try to sit here and count the photons as they come out. Um, but that's what ray tracing has to do, and there are limitations. Obviously, you can't calculate infinity, but you can calculate as much as possible, and that's where parallel computing will be really helpful. And honestly, and I'm going to start mixing my metaphors in a way here. I wonder how much quantum computing is going to help, because that's going to introduce just an exponential leap in computing power, because now we're based on a binary where a bit of information can either be 0 or 1,
Mm-hmm.
and that represents so much information. With quantum computing, in my very limited understanding of it, is basically now that bit of information could be 3 states as opposed to just 2 states. So it could be a 0, a 1, or a 2. And mathematically, that's a giant leap forward in
Yeah.
how much you can process.
Yeah, and for anyone who's really interested and feel like kind of diving into the vaults of Computer America, we actually interviewed the guy heading up IBM's quantum computer department. And, we talked about all this, but essentially you get your 0, your 1, and then you get your quantum state of either a 0, it's either a 0, a 1, or 0 and a 1. And so I guess you just call that 2. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it allows you to, it's, where they have these simple, 16 bits when we talk to them. I think someone came out with a 128-bit quantum computer. Like when those start to get into, even just a couple more orders of magnitude higher than that, they're going to blow in certain situations, like ray tracing for sure. They're going to blow ordinary computers out of the water. It's going to be pretty exciting. And then, of course, that's when you get into the ethics of it. And what happens when you can create realistic video in real time. It's you can do whatever you want. So
yeah, they're basically to put it into context, saying that if you take a quantum computer, it can break like the highest encryption algorithm that we have right now running on our conventional computers. It could break it in a matter of just a tiny fraction of the time it would take a regular traditional computer. So one of the first places that they're earmarking quantum computing for is cybersecurity
is
and
encryption,
creating ciphers that will take you hundreds of millions of years to otherwise calculate and get the proper key out of.
Yeah, and that's why when it comes to security, they've stopped pretty much developing, 256 AES or whatever, military standard it is, and they're working on quantum encryption, where the keys kind of stay in flux, and you have to have the other pair, and you have to, it's based on entanglement, blah blah blah. Way too heady for what I want to do right now, but essentially, you're right. I mean, the government, the military, larger heads than ours are definitely thinking on how to best use this technology to protect us from the same technology. So there's
exactly.
that.
Exactly.
So,
and eventually you'll have a quantum processor in your Xbox.
Probably not, and I mean that with all respect. But what's going to happen, as I understand it, is that you probably won't own anything more than a terminal, because quantum computers don't do very well when they're kind of split up and you buy like, oh, look, I got a little consumer quantum computer. It's going to be more of the fact that, one of these large companies is going to sell you a terminal that then you get to access their gigantic thousands of times more powerful than your little consumer quantum computer. You're just going to buy a terminal and everything's going to be done off-site, much like mainframes and terminals used to be. So
yeah, that's actually a very, very good point that you bring up. I think that a lot of places have become services. Windows 10 is a service as opposed to a software. I think that's a really key point that you bring up.
And actually, I've even seen it in your field, where I'm seeing more and more people who have these crazy systems by most consumer standards. They're pretty they're pretty common when it comes to graphic design or rendering or things like that. They're farming, like either individuals who have this hardware are renting their systems out to people who don't want to wait 16, 24, 48 hours. They'll rent someone else's hardware, or they will send it off to a server farm where they kind of do it as a service as well. Like all this hardware, I think with the advent of the blockchain, hey, just want to throw another buzzword out there. With the advent of the blockchain, we're getting to the point where you can start to send processing power to other people, like as a service. And that's, from what I understand, in rendering, in graphic design, that's something that's becoming more and more common. So
it is definitely, yeah. One of the first instances of that in my lifetime was the SETI at Home project.
Yeah,
where basically it crowdsourced a bunch of computation across idle computers, and I think that's it's weird because we're heading to that sort of crowd processing, but at the same time we're also kind of heading to consolidating all computing and making central computer locations, and then everybody's on a dumb terminal and your CPU cycles are offshore somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting how those paths are seemingly divergent, but they're actually convergent in some ways.
Yeah, it's who's going to have the best technology. And So, all right. So I think we're going to wrap up with this NVIDIA one, but we're not quite done talking about NVIDIA because we're going to talk about AMD and we're going to talk about FreeSync. And then, of course, we're going to tie in a bit of, because there's FreeSync 2, which is an AMD technology. And then there is, I believe it's called G-Sync. So FreeSync, G-Sync, one by AMD, the other by NVIDIA. And yeah, you have this article here again from GraphicsBeak talking about FreeSync 2 support coming to Xbox One X and the Xbox One S. And yeah, and then I also found another article that we'll touch on lightly about, if these technologies are even kind of necessary. Because, and to be fair, I think it's more G-Sync, probably because it's the more popular of the two. G-Sync gets a lot of flack from gamers, especially because it's sometimes it works well, sometimes it's a hindrance, and sometimes it swings more one way than the other. But anyways, let's go ahead and start with this article, and then we'll go to break, and then we'll come back to it. But FreeSync 2 support coming to the newer generation Xbox One consoles. So why did this catch your eye?
Well, it's interesting because it highlights just how complicated the whole process is. Going from your graphics card to your monitor is not just a simple plug and play sort of thing. Your monitor is doing some calculation on its own. It's doing some post-processing of the image, filtering the image, whatever that may be. And there might be some sync issues between what your card is outputting and what your monitor is displaying. And let's say you're, a professional gamer or my son who's crazy about gaming and getting perpetually frustrated because you feel like something's laggy. And even on the best equipment, if there's a slip in sync between your display adapter and your actual display, that causes an issue. So these things like G-Sync and FreeSync end up being ways that the display manufacturers and the display adapter manufacturers can basically be on the same wavelength as far as how to communicate so that some of the tearing and shearing issues don't happen between what your card is outputting and what your monitor thinks it needs to be doing with that image.
No, it makes perfect sense because a lot of these are non-standard, or you may have standard, but they're produced by so many different companies. Your monitor may be the hardware is within them, that not everything is going to play nicely together. So I guess it's their attempt to homogenize kind of the setting. So. All right. So
yeah, definitely, and I think it does definitely make a difference when you're dealing with real time stuff. I mean, not so much with graphics and animation, although with video and playback and things like that, yes, it can. But for gaming, where your graphics card is generating those images as fast as it can, you don't want to lose. You don't want to create an extra layer of latency between your video card and your monitor. But of course, if you bring it to the Xbox, you need to make sure that your TV or your display needs to have that compatibility. And that's what drives me crazy between FreeSync and G-Sync and this sync and that sync. Mm-hmm. It would be nice if there was just one standard everybody could go by. It would make things a little bit easier on the consumer.
Yeah, those standards, and I think where I see a lot of people, kind of run afoul of both these standards is when they have, kind of the newest, the greatest, the latest. Sometimes it's unsupported, so like these standards, each one is developed independently, and you run into situations where, just the software isn't caught up to what the newest game that you're running, or, or the newest monitor. I mean, standards are great. People really do enjoy them, but Dariush, I mean, you work with a lot of different software. You have to admit that companies gain a lot when they become a de facto standard. They get royalties and more. So,
as far as business goes, without a doubt, licensing out things, just to ask Apple. You've got to basically beg them for a license to do anything with, accessorizing their products. It can go without saying that it is a real boon. But it is a double-edged sword. It would be really nice to have one standard that everybody kind of manufactures and designs around, but obviously that can stifle some innovation that could create some compromise. And we were talking about CUDA before.
Hmm.
That's just NVIDIA's way of GPU computing. There's OpenCL, which is more akin with the OpenGL group, which is a GPU computation platform. You can't run CUDA, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for?
And
Accelerated
Dariush,
stuff
we're
on
going to
AMD
stop
because of that.
Oh, and Dariush, we're going to stop right there. We're coming to commercial break. Everyone stay tuned.
Right on.
Dariush Derakhshani, Computer America. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Dish TV is better than cable TV. Why? Because you can save 45% on packages compared to your high-priced cable bill. Wow. Take those giant scissors out and cut the cable and save with Dish TV. Plus, you get a free DVR upgrade to record your favorite shows and free installation. And with Dish Anywhere, you can watch TV for free on your mobile device. Act fast. You can save hundreds of dollars. Does your cable company do that for you? I don't think so. Get all the best TV programming at your fingertips at a fraction of the price of cable TV. So say adios, arrivederci, goodbye to the high cable bill and save up to 45% on Dish TV packages today. These are limited time offers and can change at any time. Call fast.
800-471-5325. 800-471-5325. 800-471-5325. That's 800-471-5325.
Greece is cheap.
But the airfare costs a fortune.
Paris?
Not much closer, and again, airfare...
What about Puerto Vallarta?
Let's face it, flying anywhere is just too expensive.
Wait, what's this? Low-cost airlines.
With one call to low-cost airlines, you'll drastically slash your travel costs. We're talking insanely low airline prices to any of your favorite destinations. Where would you like to go? London, Rome, Costa Rica, Australia?
Wow, that's cheap.
So why wait? Call now to learn how crazy cheap it is to fly anywhere in the U.S. or international. Our prices are so low, we can't publish them. The only way to get them is to call to instantly hear the most amazing best deals on airline travel. It's that easy. So call now and start packing.
800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. That's 800-215-4461.
And welcome back to the Computer America Show. It is 32 minutes past the hour as we continue on here with Dariush Derakhshani, and we are doing computer and not computer technology news, just the latest in graphics, and I think we're about to get into some of the not I don't want to say the more political side of it, but FreeSync 2 coming to Xbox One X and the Xbox One S. And I guess if you buy, something that is certified to work with this new standard, FreeSync 2, then things will look smoother for you. Games will not have that little bit of jitter. They won't have that, little bit of graphic lag that, Dariush, as you said, that your son can definitely notice and definitely annoy people.
Sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, he's not quite sure what's causing that little bit of lag, but for the great majority of people, it doesn't become an issue. It really doesn't. So it's kind of a niche sort of solution for getting the most out of your connection between your computer or your Xbox in this case and your monitor. But I don't think you need to rush out and buy a new Xbox One X and a FreeSync monitor and throw away your TV and stuff like that. So it's not really a huge problem. It's just one of those things that is requiring standards and communication between adapter makers or video card makers and display makers. I'm glad that's happening.
Yeah, and now to get into kind of the other side of it, I have another article here. I guess I can link it to you in the Skype deal, but it's there it is. Yeah, but it's NVIDIA. I don't want to say doing anti-competitive kind of things, but it's definitely a situation that happens sometimes when you have a player as dominant as NVIDIA, just like you have a player as dominant as Apple in the smartphone market or Intel in the processor market, or, any of these others that really seem to have, a large share. They do things like this. And this is an article from Engadget, speaking more towards AMD trying to call out NVIDIA because NVIDIA started something called the GeForce Partner Program. And they said that NVIDIA started this to, quote, ensure that gamers have full transparency into the GPU platform and software they're being sold and can confidently select products that carry the NVIDIA GeForce promise. So I guess that's kind of what you were talking about there, Dariush, when it comes to, making sure that if you buy this, it's going to work with that. And, that all seems fine when it's just making sure that NVIDIA works with all the different monitors. Mm-hmm. But according to this article, AMD explains that the vague explanation hides an attempt to elbow competition out of high-profile system lines. Part of me feels like, the fact that everything potentially could be labeled with, NVIDIA GeForce Ready or G-Sync compatible. And if there's some kind of exclusion that says that you can't put, FreeSync 2 on there or any kind of other competing technologies, is that fair, or is that just kind of playing to what the market shares are?
It definitely is playing to where the market share is. It's definitely playing to NVIDIA's basically domination right now of the video game market. It goes back to when Microsoft was under fire for having its browser baked into Windows. And there were many lawsuits where other browsers and other internet providers wanted equal share
Right.
on the Windows desktop and not have to be beholden to Internet Explorer being the only browser that's there. So it's a very similar story where NVIDIA is basically aligning itself with people at kind of a marketing core to this idea where they'll kind of help each other out if a vendor doesn't use an AMD card and says, all our gaming machines are going to be NVIDIA, and they get the seal of approval, and here's this little seal stamp on the front of the box that you'll get, and that ends up helping the vendor because NVIDIA can use its huge market share to help push that vendor and bring a little bit of familiarity. So let's say if Joe's computer is making something alongside NVIDIA, Joe's computer is going to get some FaceTime through NVIDIA's giant market share. So,
well, yeah, and it's not only that, but it's also the idea. We were just talking about standards, and people like standards because it simplifies, especially when you're buying parts. We actually did that on the air a couple months ago, and surprising how many parts similar that we picked. But you do have to read the fine lines as to see what works with what and make sure it does. I think it's the idea of standards, where if NVIDIA can persuade enough manufacturers, enough companies to say we work on the NVIDIA standard, then not only does NVIDIA's name get to pop up 100 times when you're building a computer, but the consumer gets to see that, hey, if I buy this, then this is going to work with this. And it's kind of a snowball effect that pushes AMD and other manufacturers kind of out of the market.
Yeah. Yeah, and eventually, let's say the G-Sync and the FreeSync thing. I don't know about the hardware mechanics of it, but I imagine that one standard that one company has and a competing company has its own standard. I would think that a display manufacturer would sort of try to make their monitor agnostic to be able to work with both standards from both of those card manufacturers. Try to get G-Sync and FreeSync as working. So there's some licensing and some issues, I'm sure, with hardware to deal with there. But I think by and large, you're not going to see a huge chasm of choices. I think in the end, there's a little bit of marketing hot air on both
Right.
sides of the coin here. But I think it's a very tough question to answer because it goes into business ethics and how far you want to go with free trade and how far you want to go with regulation. When is a company exerting too much influence and becoming monopolistic? So I think I
I
don't think there
yeah.
NVIDIA is there at all, but I think it's important to note that eventually your monitor is going to work whether you have an AMD card or an NVIDIA card, and that super special little tiny FreeSync, G-Sync, whatever sync thing that you bought your card for, that's what that's when it becomes important to listen to what you just said, to pay attention, to read the fine print, and make sure that your monitor is going to support this brand new, shiny card that you bought to the full extent that you
Right.
expect it to. And this is where it can cause a little bit of confusion on the consumer side. But in the end, an educated customer is gonna win. So the more you know about what you're getting, the better. It's just having to figure out what's chaff and what's market speak that you can just throw away as stupid advertising monikers and names, and get down to the what's really, what do I want,
Right.
and what's going to make that happen between these many different pieces of hardware that I've got to put together.
So, and what I really like there was, kind of educate yourself, and you did have it absolutely right. I think at the end of the day, or at least when you say it, at the end of the day, your display technology is going to work. I mean, these things are just HDMI, they are data, they are monitors, they will display anything.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just from personal anecdote, I will say that I've seen more people fed up and turn off G-Sync and FreeSync than I have seen them say, "Oh wow, this is a little jittery. Let me go turn on G-Sync." Like I've seen
Yeah.
both
Yeah.
get thrown out the window before I've seen both sought out and used. So
Yeah, I think it's a very, very thin market of people who actually find it important enough to be useful that they go after it. So it's important for the 98% of us to basically know what we're getting into, not get pulled into that hype, because even I don't have any of these enabled on my workstations, because I don't need them. I don't need any of that. If I'm outputting to video source, then I'm looking at other hardware and gen locking and things like that. But in the end, this ends up appealing to gamers who are just on the cutting edge and need to absolutely make sure everything is humming along. And in that case, they're probably well versed in hardware and what they need to get and how it needs to work together, as opposed to the casual person who will very easily get fed up and say, "This is not worth it. Why am I wasting my time?"
right. So I think we're going to leave that there, and we're going to go ahead and move on to some of these other articles because I want to get to at least one or two of these. And why don't we go ahead and talk about, well, I guess kind of gaming to gaming, where, let's see, yeah, it was right here. So Science Daily, student develops gaming technology for scientific
Yes.
research.
Yeah.
What's the story?
Well, this dovetails really nicely to what we were talking about with the GPU and CUDA and all that. So this student has developed an interface, for lack of a better word, to take some very calculation intensive simulations, and instead of putting them on many CPUs, putting them on more efficiently parallel GPUs. Basically, in a way, kind of not bothering with CUDA, not bothering with OpenCL. I'm not sure how they built it or what they built, but basically, they took a program that simulates movement of water, that's really important for engineering and design purposes, and which would otherwise tie up many CPUs for a really stupid long time. And I'll explain that's why in a second.
Sure.
And was able to compute it all on GPUs. And the crux of the matter here is that the GPU is so much more efficient at having many parallel streams, as AMD puts it, or CUDA cores, or what are they calling them now? Tensor cores.
Yeah.
Those cores, there's so many more of those cores on a GPU than you would fit on your quad core, hexacore, or octa-core CPU. And that goes to show you the types of computation is important. So one type of computation will work better in a parallel environment, while another type of computation will work better in a serial environment where it calculates one thing and then moves on to the next.
A little bit to what you said earlier, it's the idea of 13,000 little hands versus 8 very powerful hands.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that's what these little cores are on the GPU. They're much weaker than a CPU core, but there's just so many more of them. And this type of calculation has just millions and billions of calculations to make and billions of data points to process, but they're not very deep processes. They're much more simple processes. So one of those simpler processes can take up one of these tensor or these GPU cores much more efficiently than having having basically a shotgun to shoot a fly. Having a CPU core being completely wasted on running a thread on this simple computation. And this is the sort of the parallel versus, do I want more cores or do I want a faster clock speed? And the GPUs, where they're reigning very, very prominently, is with the many cores that they have. So the more you create your software and your calculation need around that sort of thinking, the more GPUs are going to help you out. And I hope, games, more and more games will be not only more multi-core, but they're shifting more of the physics calculations, which again are many little calculations onto the GPU as opposed to tying up your CPU for those tasks.
There was a technology, I haven't heard really anything else about it after kind of the tech demo. It was the idea of it was the idea that you essentially create video games using particles instead of planes and other geometrical shapes, where objects are like clusters or clouds of these particles that then each one can be interacted with and moved and manipulated and that kind of thing. And it, as opposed to planes with physics and things like that, it just seemed like a different way to render video games that this, like the technology you're talking about, would do much better with, because I guess we can perfect an old technology as well as it can be perfected, right. But it's new technology. It's going to be what takes us, kind of that step further. So yeah, this is very cool. And by the way, if you're watching the video portion, just check out the video of, kind of that really spells out what we're talking about. It's only like a 15-second YouTube video, but it shows, pressure, forces, and it shows, let's see if I get this right, 2,700,000 different water particles interacting with, essentially in a closed container. Very, very interesting, but I can't imagine, sicking, even 16 cores onto, having to, kind of manipulate 2.7 million different particles.
Absolutely. And that's where the GPU really slides in. Your CPU, everything else would just slow down on your computer, and again, it's a little wasted energy having CPU cores run simple calculations. They're different than GPU cores.
Why? So and part of this is that student develops gaming technology for scientific research. I mean, the headline is obviously a little attention grabbing. If you could just explain it real quick. I mean, what did he really kind of do? Because I assumed that scientists would be kind of smart enough to know, what that would really be great for. my research. Like, why did it take this student to kind of crack the code?
Well, academics, the gears in academia move very slow. And when you already have a a workflow established, and you have all the software that you've basically invested a lot of time and energy and money into, it's really hard to just pick up and change everything and turn it on its ear. So I think the cool thing about this article is that they were able to fit what's already existing, taking it off of the supercomputer sort of mode of thinking, and able to adapt it to be able to work on GPU scale, as opposed to rewriting everything from scratch. And I think a lot of simulations and a lot of software already does take into account what the GPU can do versus the CPU. At a industrial, at a commercial level, we see that a little bit in the consumer market, more so with games. And like I said, like physics calculations. And if you remember, NVIDIA had PhysX a while ago, which was sort of their, they acquired that, I think. And that was just how they calculated physics, ragdolls and all that kind of stuff. So that's happening on your video card more often than you think. But this type of industrial, even academic work, has to kind of borrow with what's already built, because it is just a pain in the butt to have to remake everything.
Right.
So I think that's the cool part about what the student has done, is being able to kind of convert what's existing in some ways. Now, I don't know if they completely rewrote how much they were able to keep or how they adapted it to work, but it does definitely, as you said before, it seems like foregone conclusion that, well, yeah, everything should be kind of created that way for now. So I'm hoping this is sort of fitting into the adapter way of saying it, adapting what's already there and making it more efficient on the GPU.
Right. Yeah, no, and it's the idea that something that is made for consumers, so mass produced, ready to go out of the box, and being able to adapt that for specialized needs, and in this case, academia. No, that's probably noteworthy in itself right there. So, all right, so link to that in the show notes. Let's go ahead and try to get one more in here before, and I'll kind of leave it up to you because all these are pretty darn cool. Yeah, where do you want to take this? Either the materials, or we can talk about the video game. Because by the way, we just kind of started up our stream on twitch.tv. And yeah, I think, talking about video game addiction or video game disorders would be kind of interesting to put on there. I'll leave it up to you though, because both are cool.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about flexible fabrics, but I think
Sure.
that might be something we should pick up next week. As far as the article about internet gaming disorder, this is something that's sort of coming up now, where they're trying to define the characteristics of this new thing that they're trying to basically define and name.
Okay.
Internet gaming disorder, and what that means. And I think in a way it could sound a little alarmist, where people are like, oh great, now there's a new mental health crisis. But I think it all comes back down to basically a person's ability not to be addicted to something. So it's an addiction profile. And I think the cool part of it is it's very specific in the way that it can, I guess, generate a model of behavior that can identify and better target resources to help somebody with their addiction to, in this case, internet gaming. I think that's pretty commendable. And I hope it doesn't become a buzzword sort of alarm on the news that does your kid have internet gaming disorder sort of thing. I think if it doesn't get to that point, I'll be really super happy. But I think it's
absolutely
key
will.
that people are looking into it.
Yeah,
in that way.
it absolutely will. I mean, every time, but I feel like the conversation is shut down on both sides of the argument here, because one side is, kids, back in my days, we didn't spend nearly as much time playing video games. This is, this is definitely not good for them because I didn't do it. And then on the other side, there are people who shut down the conversation by saying, well, hey, back in the 50s, you said that rock music was full of the devil. And, other things like that were going to be equally hyperbolic. It was, I think both sides, either they want to vehemently condemn it or they don't want to talk about it at all. And I guess that's where science has to come in, because it's finding that middle ground that both sides can say, well, maybe there's something not too bad, or there is something there. And I don't know how to really approach that, because I play a lot of video games, and I'll be honest, I'm kind of scared to hear that maybe these, too much video games or certain kinds of video games can actually cause a problem.
It's absolutely true. Moderation is really what is key to a well-balanced life. Not that I'm anybody to preach about this, but too much of anything can be bad for you. And I use an anecdote from an old colleague of mine, very fit gentleman. He was an actor and an editor, would, again, very, very cut, very, very fit, would exercise all the time, ate very healthy. And he concentrated on eating very dark, leafy vegetables, spinach, kale, stuff like that, because there's so much iron and it's really good for you, and so on and so on. And he told me one day, many years ago, he's like, I just went to the doctor, and he told me I'm in danger of having a stroke. I'm like, oh my gosh, why? You are so fit and you eat very well. He's like, well, I'm eating too much iron. I'm eating too much kale and too much spinach, and that is getting my iron levels too high. And I'm like, well, there you go. Too much of a good thing ended up being possibly dangerous for him. I mean, he's okay, obviously.
Right.
But the same thing with gaming. I think there's a healthy dose, and I know parents that don't allow their kids any screen time, and whenever they come to our house, they are glued to watching video games. And I think that's a little bit dangerous. But it comes with a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
If you're going to allow screen time, you need to be there to monitor and administer to that screen time to make sure it's not too much.
But
at the same time, a prohibition, I think, is too harsh.
Right. I mean, part of me feels like a prohibition, or refusing to give any kind of screen time or interface beyond even just like schoolwork, or whatever, like the absolute minimum. I feel like that's kind of cruel, because you aren't preparing them for what the world is going to be. It's kind of the world that you want to happen, because hey, you mentioned that when your son's friends come over and they don't get to have their own console or computer, and they're glued to it. What happens when they go away to college, when they get that first bit of freedom, and they're not really, I don't want to use the word desensitized, but they're not well adjusted to their new surroundings.
Absolutely. They become overstimulated with the possibility of all these things that they can do now and have all the screen time. And that could end up in some binge behavior. And again, I've talked about this before. I think we were too liberal with my son's screen time, and that led to some issues, and we've had to kind of find a new balance in there. So it's a never ending sort of thing, and there's no one answer that helps anything. But I think the more parents talk about this sort of thing, and the more aware they are, I think it takes the stigma and the demonization away from the two different sides that you're always bombarded with in the media, so that you can find your nice cream-filled center and settle into that as best for you and your family.
Right. And from what I understand about video game disorders or internet gaming disorders, and from reading this article, it doesn't seem to really change what I kind of knew of the subject, was that for most people you're going to be okay, but if you have certain risk factors, including things like depression or kind of history on being dependent on certain things, you are going to be at risk for for this. So hey, for everyone, with that being said, the music means that we're just done here. And I will say, Dariush, thank you for coming on. And I know the conversation kind of took a twist and turn away to and back and from, gaming and,
always fun,
and videos. It was fun. It was definitely fun. So in the meantime, if people want to find out more about you, where can they go?
Facebook. You can find me on Facebook. Twitter is @Kush3D. I don't tweet very much, but yeah, I'm out on the internet.
All right, perfect. And of course, go to college because he's there as well. So everyone, thank you for tuning into Computer America. It was a lot of fun. And like I said, everything that we talked about here today will be in the show notes. So in the meantime, tune in tomorrow as we have our All Linux program with Marcel Gagne. It's always a lot of fun. And we are going to be talking about, a lot of different Linux associated topics. But in the meantime, thank you for tuning in. 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. 5 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. Everyone, have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.